We are joined by Sean Callahan of Husker Online. Huge news in Lincoln today. Dylan Raiola has committed to Nebraska. Sean, this is the biggest Nebraska recruiting news since?
It's hard to really, compare it. I mean, you can go back to like that recruiting class that had Ndamukong Suh and Marlon Lucky, and it was a top 5 class. That recruiting class produced 2 eventual Big 12 players of the year, Zach Taylor and Ndamukong Suh in 1 year. They haven't had a guy this highly ranked since that Marlon Lucky Suh class. So in terms of ranking and, legacy, it's got to be right up there with one of the more high profile commits Nebraska's ever landed, especially when you talk about it as the quarterback position.
Well, and the other piece of this obviously is who he is, whose son he is. And I wonder, Matt Rhule got this job in basically a year ago. How many times has he heard that name over and over and over again between then and now?
Well, yeah. Really, for the last 3+ years, Dylan Raiola has been a household recruit name. I call him a grocery store recruit. Like, he's a guy that when you go to the grocery store, people stop and ask you questions about Dylan Raiola. And there's very few high school kids that have that kind of star power. But you go back to when Matt Rhule came, the one coach that he retained on his staff was Donovan Raiola, the uncle of Dylan Raiola. And immediately that allowed Nebraska to stay in it. And then Dylan decommitted from Ohio State. The Huskers were involved with Dylan all the way through May. Then he switched his commitment, or he made his commitment to Georgia. But they continued to keep a dialogue because his uncle's here. And having the uncle in Nebraska on the coaching staff, it allowed Dylan just to have an open dialogue with what was going on. And they came back to the Michigan game this year. Nobody really thought much of that, though, because he was committed to Georgia. And you're like, oh, he's just here to see his uncle. But they continued to keep the ball in play to an extent to get to this point, which it's a shocker, I think, in the recruiting world to see a 5-star guy like this pick Nebraska right now.
So we heard all this bubble up a week ago, that this was a possibility. And then also that coincided with Kyle McCord looking at Nebraska as a graduate transfer and then deciding not to. Should we assume that Dylan Raiola is going to be Nebraska's starter next year, or that he's going to come in spring practice with a chance to win the starting job?
Yeah, I think it sets up for him to have a great chance to obviously be the guy and win the job. In the spring, you'll have Chubba Purdy, you'll have Heinrich Haarberg, and Daniel Kaelin. And all of them bring something to the table. Chubba played well to end the year. He's a guy that's been in college 4 years. Heinrich Haarberg won 5 games as a starting quarterback. And then Daniel Kaelin was an Elite 11 guy. So there will be formidable competition. But yeah, I think Dylan Raiola, if you were to put Vegas odds on it, he's the starting quarterback for Nebraska next year, barring injury or something crazy. And you saw the news out of Athens. Carson Beck announced, and it was almost fitting that the Raiola announcement followed the Carson Beck announcement, almost like that was kind of the thing that brought this thing over the goal line. All right, we know we're going to do this, but the fact that starting at Georgia is not even on the table for 2024, that was kind of the final domino that fell to allow this announcement to go public.
Yeah, and I do wonder how much of that, what happened last week coincided with Carson Beck kind of being on in that frame of mind, because, you heard that Beck was thinking about the NFL, but then about that same time last week was when it started to be, okay, he's probably coming back.
Yeah, and I don't know what all went down to get to that point Monday. If they knew Beck was coming back, if there's other elements involved, with NIL, et cetera. But it got to that point, and it was like a bomb went off in Lincoln on Monday night. You talk to people that were around Kyle McCord Monday night, people that were at the dinner and other things, you would have thought Kyle McCord was going to be a Husker. And things pivoted that quickly with Dylan Raiola at that point.
So if you're Matt Rhule, you mentioned this is a grocery store recruit. This is a guy that everybody in the world wants to know, are you going to get him? Are you going to get him? Are you going to get him? How important of a get is this for Matt Rhule as he goes into year 2, finishes off his first full cycle recruiting class?
I mean, it's so important, not for just Matt Rhule, but the entire state, the entire program. And Trev Alberts is trying to push forward a $450 million stadium renovation project. Nebraska is trying to push forward their NIL and fundraising for that. Matt Rhule is trying to sell what he's doing. And it's pretty easy to now appeal to offensive recruits when you have a 5-star quarterback that you can sell to them, receivers, running backs, etc. So there's a lot now moving forward. And I mean, having Dylan Raiola makes Nebraska more attractive to the Big Ten television partners. I mean, NBC, CBS, Fox, you might want to put a Nebraska game on now if there's a decision, just because of if Dylan Raiola is a sensational freshman guy that could, move the needle. I mean, it's big for so many reasons when you look at it at a place for Nebraska.
So is there a chance that this leads to either more flips or some uncommitted guys deciding on Nebraska here in the next couple of days?
All bets are off. I mean, they had some other players in town, but they weren't offensive players. They had a couple linebackers, a portal corner. Their numbers are fairly set already for 2024. They're looking at a potential transfer portal running back. The problem, and I think Nebraska's in the spot that a lot of people are in right now. Dante Dow, by the way, the Oregon running back, is a guy that they've had some contact with. But the number situation for everybody right now with the COVID and all the other things, it's so hard. I use the analogy, it's a car only has 5 seats. Well, that's a college football roster, and you're trying to squeeze a 6th person into a car right now when there's not a 6th seat. And that's every college football roster in the country, because you have all these older guys. I mean, I looked at that Montana game, the FCS playoffs, and there's a former Nebraska player starting at left tackle for Montana in his 7th season. So I think the number situation makes it a little bit more delicate, but NIL helps you. You can get creative and figure out ways to get some players in your program now if you play the rule book right with NIL too.
That's the thing, Sean, is Nebraska's got a pretty robust NIL program. So it feels like this is the sort of thing, if they can get winning, that suddenly, not maybe right now, but in years coming, that they become an attractive portal destination or an attractive destination for other 5-star recruits.
Yeah, you talk about just the fundraising efforts it will jumpstart, because the Pede family has been instrumental in getting Nebraska's NIL to where it's at right now with the 1890 Initiative Collective. But it's got to be more than them. I mean, there's got to be a much stronger booster push, and this is the type of stuff that does that. It raises money for Trev Alberts for the football stadium and so many things. So yeah, there's a major windfall for everybody with Dylan Raiola, and obviously he's got to produce and got to live up to his end of the bargain. But I've seen him several times and watched a lot of his tape, and his arm is as good as you're going to see. Can Nebraska build a team now around him to be competitive? They've got a great schedule for their first 7 games next year, which will be nice to build in potentially a freshman starting quarterback if he is the guy next year. So there's a lot to be optimistic about as Nebraska tries to claim it's the joke here is their offseason national championship. They're the defending offseason national champions, Andy, and they might carry that belt on again this offseason.
Well, yeah, every year. And look, I understand why. Like we've talked about this before. This is a place that is obsessed with the football team, that it is the biggest game in town. It's the biggest news that you can have. And you've got to fill that off season. And it's usually with stories about the recruiting class, about the incoming portal players, about new coaches. And there's not going to be anything particularly negative going on then, because there's no losses to talk about. So this is going to be maybe their greatest offseason national championship.
Well, yeah, and then the schedule, I mean, they open with some favorable games. They have to play Colorado and Lincoln, which will be a major game. Obviously, Deion Sanders coming here, but Sanders versus Raiola. I mean, you already can see like that headline between Fox and NBC and CBS. I mean, there'll be people that want that game, obviously. So, there's a lot of optimism and excitement, and they return a lot, Andy. I mean, this team brings back just about every key player. I mean, they're going to lose a couple, but it was one of the smallest senior numbers I've ever seen on a Nebraska team And then they've had very few portal entries too. So there's a lot to be optimistic about, because what was the issue? Quarterback play. And they're adding arguably the number 1 ranked quarterback in the country to this team for next year.
Well, we will find out. Now, we played a fun game with Zach Berry from OM Spirit. We were deciphering Lane Kiffin tweets over the weekend. They were getting a lot of portal commitments over the weekend. So his tweets were, you could kind of see which ones matched which. But I want to ask you to decipher this Matt Rhule tweet from a few nights ago. This is Matt Rhule tweeting, "Can't wait until people hear what I've heard, see what I've seen, and know what I know. Hashtag GBR," which is Go Big Red. "No edges, LOL." What does that mean?
The joke amongst Nebraska fans is, hey, they got Raiola, the bourbon was flowing. They were just having fun. But yeah, that was an interesting tweet by Matt Rhule, because he had been Twitter dark for, most of the football season, if not all the football season. That was, kind of the first barrage of tweets we've seen Matt Rhule make since the summertime. But clearly excited about where they're at with things and this recruiting class and how they've put it together to, maybe push into the top 20 for sure, top 25 class.
Well, it'll be very interesting. We're hoping to have Matt Rhule on the Wednesday signing day show. So I will ask him when he comes on exactly what that meant, because it wasn't lyrics of anything. I thought it might be some song lyrics, but like some maybe deep down Dave Matthews Band lyrics, but that's not what it was. So we will see if we can get Matt Rhule to reveal.
Yeah, he will. Coach Rhule, he's open and honest, and he's not going to, his $1 million to $2 million quarterback comment, that went viral. That got him an appearance on the Pat McAfee show.
Exactly.
How many 5 and 7 head football coaches get long interviews on the Pat McAfee show?
Yeah, Nick Saban gets one every week, but he has a considerably better record. So you're exactly right. But you're right about that too. And that's probably another question worth asking him, because he was the one who so kindly provided us with those numbers to help set the market. I imagine a 5-star quarterback who is considered one of the best in his class is not necessarily the cheapest thing in the world either. So,
no, quarterback, it's at the Power 5 level in the SEC and the Big Ten and the top ACC programs. It's $1 million position for the top programs, if not more. When you look at what this has become with NIL.
Well, it's going to be very interesting. And the bourbon probably flowing in Lincoln as we speak. I know the TV station is headed to your house. Like we break into our regular programming kind of news in Lincoln. So have fun with this one tonight, Sean.
Hey, thanks, Andy. I appreciate it. And we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples On 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On 3 Sports YouTube channel.